What is up, Pitt fans? Welcome to another edition of the PG Pitt Show brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is where you can bet all of the best March Madness action, including you can bet on who you think is going to win the Most Outstanding Player Award for this year's NCAA tournament. You can even give it a little bit of a local flair if you remember our old friend Malik Thomas. He is not a favorite. He is far from it. Odds at plus 50,000. Tied for last with a handful of others, but he is still on the board. And so if you want to take a flyer on Malik Thomas winning Most Outstanding Player at the 2026 NCAA tournament for the Arkansas Razorbacks, you sure can do that. But on this episode, Abby, we are shifting back into Pitt football mode. Some things are happening. First week back from spring break, and the Panthers played their first inter-squad scrimmage of the spring last Saturday. Big win for the offense, pretty handily won. Sounds like the offense was really able to do a lot of what it really wanted to. And I just think this time of year is pretty interesting because you can kind of sell yourself on whatever you want. Like Pat Narduzzi references this all the time, in training camp and spring ball, like the offense plays well. Is it because the defense played badly or did the offense play well? If the defense won a scrimmage, is it because they played well or did the offense not play so well either? And so, you can kind of sell yourself on anything, but, it's still going to make everyone kind of overreact when they hear one side is way ahead of the other.
And I think it makes sense that the offense was way ahead of the defense, even if that's not necessarily usually the case. I feel like most springs you're going to hear that the defense is set up and flowing a little bit better than the offense. But when you really think about like the losses from both sides, the offense returns a majority of its starters except for at wide receiver. Well, Blue Hicks in that, but like your top two wide receivers are gone. Other than that, and Jeff Percy, but like other than that, you're returning everyone else. And that is a really good starting point. So of course they're going to be a little bit of ahead. You're not really having to introduce new people to this, as many new people to this Cade Bell system, which usually is a little bit, has been a hurdle the past 2 years. But then when you think about the defensive end, they took a lot of losses, maybe not on the defensive line, but on the line and linebackers and the secondary. Like there's just new people being implemented into those schemes, and it's there's going to be a learning curve, and so it makes sense to me that the offense did stand out really well with the amount of work you have to anticipate this defense is doing, just replacing people.
Yeah, at least half your starters, if my math is correct, from the defense are gone. You have two new position coaches. You have a new guy in the defensive coordinator's chair. Meanwhile, on offense, you retain all of your coaches. You introduce a few faces, but like you said, like it's really only at receiver where you're plugging in some new guys, and even one of them is a guy who's played in the system before. So yeah, I'm with you. I'm not necessarily surprised that the offense kind of took an early lead, if you want to phrase it that way, but I still think that it's encouraging to have kind of gotten a leg up in this scrimmage, at least taken this one coming out of the gates, because, well, I'm not super concerned about the defense, to be quite frankly. And we'll talk about that a little bit more lately, but I think also the offense, maybe from what we're hearing, is kind of, there were two positions in particular that I think we had big questions about coming into this spring, who played pretty well in that scrimmage, or at least, the result reflected that they played well. And to me, that's the wide receivers and the offensive line. One of the things that Pat Narduzzi said when we talked to him this afternoon was that explosive plays were really kind of the name of the game for the offense on Saturday. A bunch of big plays in the passing game, and if they didn't run the ball as well as they'd like, maybe there were some opportunities to create turnovers for the defense. But look, if you're hitting on explosive passing plays, that means that both your offensive line is blocking for long enough to give Mason Heintschel time to hit on those throws, and then your wide receivers are getting open and making plays. And those are really two huge things for this offense at this juncture. You were worried about, how they were going to hold up in pass protection. You were worried about if they had the firepower at wide receiver. And, this is just an inter-squad scrimmage, the first one. We're, sitting here on March 23rd talking about it. We're a long way from opening day, but that is what you want to see. You want to see those two position groups playing well if you think that Pitt has a chance to make a step forward this year.
Absolutely. And it was also good to hear that there were two different running backs who got touchdowns as well, simply from the offensive line perspective of really being able to open up holes and allow the running backs to really get there. I mean, and of course, having Ja'Kyrie and Turner back is pivotal to that. And when talking about the wide receivers and offensive line, I feel like almost every single availability, there's been one person at each position that has been talked about repeatedly. And on the offensive line, I think that's transfer Netinho Olivieri. I mean, he gets brought up so frequently. It seems like he's really taken that left tackle spot over and just is talked about so much, whether it's, Isaiah Neal talking about him today, Ryan Carretta talking about him today. It sounds like he's a really solid replacement, or maybe even a step up from what they had last season with Jeff Percy. And that's not saying Jeff Percy was bad. It just, with the way they're talking about him specifically, it makes me like get a little excited in the sense of maybe he's adding a little bit more to this returning group.
If I could just interject real quickly, like you pair that with the way that Cade Bell talked about Ryan Baer and BJ Williams, saying that two of our best linemen are seniors now, super experienced, really making strides. And then also what we know about Ryan Carretta stepping in at center and really being a solid piece last year and taking a step forward as a full-time starter. I think that's, a lot of really encouraging things we're hearing about the line. Okay. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
No, you're good. I'm glad you made those points because I was going to forget, but like you said, it's just really, it's a great foundation to have, especially in the spring. Then when you talk about wide receiver, I feel like the name that keeps coming up over and over again is Bryce Yates, which is very encouraging to hear on that end as well, because that's a guy that we saw get reps and we saw, have some really great moments last season, but fairly inexperienced. And if Narduzzi's, he talked about, he had a touchdown in the scrimmage. I think he said 5 catches for 152 yards. I might have the catches wrong there, but 152 yards I know is correct. And when you're having a returner with less experience, just step up and really make their mark, like it seems like Bryce Yates has with the amount of times he's been brought up, it is really encouraging knowing that it seems like he's poised to step into a starter role, make those, explosive plays. And he's juking at the defense too. And Narduzzi brought that up multiple times. And that's just, with all of the questions about the wide receivers, it's good to know that they seem very confident in Bryce Yates.
Yeah, Bryce Yates seems like someone who plays kind of beyond their experience level, beyond their years. Pat Narduzzi, the one thing that he repeated a couple times today was that Bryce Yates is really a smart player, and he knows everywhere that he has to be. He knows the offense like the back of his hand, and I just think in an offense like this where you're trying to get players into space, I think it's really helpful to have a receiver who knows angles, knows their routes. I think he's like a good athlete and everything. I think he's got some speed and some twitch, but just being a smart player, I think goes a long way at wide receiver in this offense as well. So I'm really excited to see what he can do because he was a guy who I think we were both pretty high on him, especially after the West Virginia game. Forget there may have been a game after that where he made a few plays as well, and then he just kind of fell off the map a little bit. Not fell off the map, but just didn't see as much playing time down the stretch of ACC play. And so hopefully that we see a little bit more of him, a year of growth, a step forward, more opportunity. I think that's going to do, wonders for him. I'm excited to see Tony Kinsler too, for kind of similar reasons, like a guy that we saw play a little bit early and then fall off the map a little bit, fall out of the rotation a little bit. And so does he take this opportunity? Is he able to kind of level up a little bit as well? I think the other thing that I found encouraging, and this kind of goes hand in hand with creating big plays, but Mason Heintschel, turnover free. By every sound of it, he was really, really good on Saturday. And that is, we didn't mention at the top, but it's kind of the obvious thing is that if this team is going to take a step forward, that means Mason Heintschel also has to take a step forward. And it sounds like at least the early returns are really positive about what Mason Heintschel is doing, which you compare that to this time last year, what we were seeing, hearing, saying about Eli Holstein. It's very different.
Oh, yes, absolutely different. I just remember the commentary was different, whether it was from Narduzzi. There was just a lack of effort, but it wasn't total not, contributing.
We were talking about his injury a lot,
Yes.
We thought there were some kind of lingering effects of what happened during his first year at Pitt, and that was carrying over into kind of his preparation, everything that he was able to do in the spring. And Mason Heintschel's had no such limitations. And I think we also kind of learned later on that Eli Holstein's struggles were not entirely because of that injury, even as he got healthier and, went into the regular season. He still didn't look as sharp as maybe you wanted him to. Well, certainly not as sharp as Pat Narduzzi wanted him to because, well, he ended up getting benched. But, we're hearing no such thing about Mason Heintschel.
No. And you're hearing it from defensive players talking about his leadership. I thought it was really profound when Isaiah Neal today said he's one of the greatest leaders he's ever been around. Like, that speaks volumes, especially when you consider some of the leaders that Isaiah Neal has played with over his career. And when you hear that he is really just taking ownership of it, like you said, it's just a different mindset. It makes you more confident going into, the rest of spring camp and then eventually training camp. And it's just good to hear. And it's good to hear that like it's all coming together is what it feels like. Because last year there was obviously maybe not a disconnect between Mason Heintschel and the offensive line, but there were genuine issues. And when you hear that Narduzzi said it wasn't a sack fest, which is huge. I mean, I'm sure Mason Heintschel still got sacked at least once during the scrimmage, but when you're hearing those positive things that he's being protected, which is making him be able to find the right guy in the right time, it makes you think that this offense is going to take a step up. Obviously, cautiously optimistic there because really who knows what's going to happen when we get to, opening day, but I have more positive takeaways about the offense than I do negative ones.
Yeah, and I think, I would not be surprised if we come back a week from today after Pitt goes through its second scrimmage and the defense, washes out the offense. Like, and there's a swing in the pendulum. At the very least, I think the defense is not going to be as poor as they were on Saturday, which is, I guess, what leads into our kind of our closing question here a little bit. And I may have answered it already, but I mean, is there really any reason to be concerned about this defense? I think there are the same concerns that we maybe had coming into the spring, but I don't, in my mind at least, and I'm curious to know what you think, like my expectations for this defense has not changed. I still kind of expect the same thing out of them, even after maybe a shaky start with some new faces like we talked about.
Yeah, I liked what Narduzzi said about, the linebackers weren't like anything jumping off the page, but they were steady. And I think that's good for where we're at in the spring. And hopefully, you're getting to the point where they are jumping off the page. But you also have to remember that this linebackers group is replacing Kyle Lewis and Rasheem Biles. And it's a lot of new guys. But, we're hearing great things about the defensive line. And that helps because they've returned so many guys. But, Elite Nairn and Jeremiah Warren get brought up very frequently. Warren had a takeaway sticker on his helmet, too, which is beneficial. I feel good about the corners as well. I mean, Narduzzi was like, we have 6 guys that are competing for those 2 starting spots. And that's what you want to hear. The only one that I think I'm slightly concerned about, and this goes back to even, just from the portal when we were talking about needs is I'm a little concerned about the safeties, not heavily. I just think a lot of this is hinging upon Josh Guerrier's ability to really cement himself and really get into that role. And Narduzzi said he probably has the hardest job of anyone right now and really learning that. And, we've heard a couple of his, blips here and there, but I also think Josh Guerrier is the kind of guy who's going to figure it out. So I'm that's the only one that I have a question mark about, because I know Chris Brookins is going to handle his stuff, but is Josh Guerrier going to be able to get on track in time for opening day? And the great thing about that is that's not until late August, early September. That's good news when you have so many guys just being like, maybe they're not jumping off the page right now, but they're consistent, they're hitting their marks, and they're making strides, which, even after a loss, I feel like that is important for this group.
Yeah, the one thing I think that Pat Narduzzi brought up, which my ears kind of perked up, and it relates to the secondary, but he did say that there were some opportunities to create turnovers, create takeaways that Pitt kind of slipped through their fingers, like literally slipped through their fingers, like an interception went through their fingers. And so that is something that they really struggled with in 2024. Like, I forget what the number was, but there were a ridiculous amount of plays that, after the fact, Pitt said, man, we had opportunities to be a much better defense, a more opportunistic defense, but we couldn't catch, a duck thrown our way, in the defensive secondary. And so my ears do perk up that way because I do think that interceptions were a really valuable weapon for Pitt last season. I mean, like, obviously, Rasheed Biles returned 2 for a touchdown, and Kavir Baines had a handful as well. Like, there were, that Syracuse game, the way that they turned over the orange was really huge to winning that game. And so I just think turnovers are supposed to be a big feature of this defense, and it can really hinder it when you're not creating turnovers at kind of a high rate. So that was one thing I was a little worried about, and just like, you would love to see some better ball skills as well. The linebackers thing, I remember him saying that, and I think combined, there are two sides to this. Like, given who you've lost, like, I'm not expecting many superstars at linebacker. Like I've talked about, I think Braylon Lovelace is really set for a big year. But the difference between solid and, elite for this linebacker group, like, that doesn't concern me quite as much as, like, that is really mitigated if your defensive line is able to create pressure and get sacks and tackles for a loss. And so, I've been thinking about this over the past, maybe week or so. But, like, I do wonder if there are diminishing returns in this particular style of defense for how good your linebackers would be. Like, if they can create plays for you and create turnovers and be All-Americans, that's awesome. But I do think that, like, this entire defensive scheme that Pat Narduzzi's been running for however many years now is really just predicated on being really good up front. And so if you had to make some kind of trade-off, if you could, trade better defensive line play for not quite as good linebacker play, you would take that trade-off. Obviously, you want all of them to be good, but I'm really much more concerned about, okay, is this defensive line going to be able to get pressure and get home and create havoc? And then on the back end, can the defensive secondary kind of pay it off by creating some turnovers for them? Those are the two things that I think I'm going to be watching over the rest of spring ball and thinking about going into training camp because, well, I think those are the two kind of most important things about, a Pat Narduzzi defense.
I will say when it comes to turnovers and interceptions, you still have Braylon Lovelace who had 2. You still have Cruz Brookins who had 2. And you have Sean Lee Jr. and Shadarian Harrison, which, like, yes, you're leaving out big names there, like, as you called out, Biles, Lewis, Kavir Baines. But when you have that foundation, I think that's a solid start because I kind of see interceptions similar to, like, this is a terrible analogy, but like 3-pointers. When you see one go down, it's easier to do the next ones. And so when you have guys that we already know can do interceptions, that in theory should help the rest of them as well. And like you said about the defensive line, I feel like, yes, absolutely important. And that's why I think it's phenomenal that they were able to keep a majority of their guys. I mean, yes, for instance, Brew is a big loss. But when you have Isaiah Neal talking about how much he's enjoying the challenge and the creativity that he gets to do on defensive end, that's huge. Then you also have Sean Fitzsimmons, Nick James, and Jimmy Scott back. Like, that is a really solid foundation just within those 4. And then you look at the guys that they brought in as well as some younger guys. Reston Layman comes to mind, freshman. He is one of 3 guys who had 2 takeaways on his helmet. Like, again, takeaways, you don't know if he was going up against other freshmen or not, but that still stands out to me. And so what I like is that you have your foundation, but the new blood, as Neil said today, is allowing them to implement newish things. He didn't go into details, but when you're able to have that similarity, you're able to have that core, but able to implement new things. I just can't imagine this group taking a major step down. I mean, at minimum, I see them playing just as well as they did last year, if not better.
I'm with you. I have no real worries about the defense. I have things that I'm looking out for and things that you want to see. I think it's also, you bring up a good point about, like, some of these younger guys that we didn't get to see a whole lot of last year. Like, Jaden Moore is another one that comes to mind. Like, that's a guy that we have heard about nonstop really since he arrived on campus, but we haven't really seen him actually play a whole lot. And then combine that with getting a full season of Isaiah Neal at defensive end. Like, I think that could be a real benefit for him as well if he's able to kind of focus on one position. So there are a lot of encouraging things to still consider and still be on the lookout for, even if it was a rough weekend for the defense. I think to a certain extent, it can be expected. And like you said, we are not expecting many hiccups from them moving forward. I would also be surprised if, maybe they're not a top, whatever they were, 5 or 10 run defense in the country again, but I do still think that they're going to be pretty good and good enough for Pitt to get where it wants it to go, get where it's trying to go, and to at least be as good overall as it was last year. It's a lot of takeaways from just one scrimmage, but there are 2 more. Well, are there 2 more? Is there one more, and then the spring game? The spring game count as one? I think it does.
You count the spring game for sure.
I think so.
And then that definitely one this weekend. It's just on that next weekend. Do they have one? I'm not sure. They
we're
might.
We're gonna find out. And if they do, we'll let you guys know about it. But that is all we've got for this video. Make sure as we follow the rest of spring ball and we introduce a new women's basketball coach this Friday, Robin Harmony, coming to Pitt from College of Charleston. That was announced today. We'll be there covering that. We'll be covering spring ball as well. So make sure you like this video and subscribe to PG Pitt on YouTube so that you do not miss a thing. And I'll follow all of our written work at post-gazette.com. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.